Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Productivitycast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
Hello again, productivity enthusiasts. This is Productivitycast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I'm joined here today with Augusto Pinaud and Francis Wade. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here.
Good morning.
Great. We have a fantastic show today. We are going to be talking a little bit philosophically today. Not that we don't philosophically talk on most episodes, right? But but today we're going to be talking about productivity and its relationship to integrity. And what I wanted us to do is to start off with a discussion about how we actually define integrity, because I think it's actually very different from person to person in terms of what integrity is.
I think for me, integrity means having a system that is complete, so that nothing is missing, that there are no elements that are out of place. What I find with a lot of my clients and people I train is that their systems are for the most part self-developed or self-created. And somewhere in their teens, they put together a bunch of habits, practices, and tools. And they come into adulthood, and sometimes late adulthood, never really having examined what they put together. And as a result, sometimes something is missing. So, for example, I remember working with one client, one trainee, who told me that, she was feeling really guilty because she couldn't remember all of her tasks. And I said, well, you've probably outlived and outstripped the boundaries of your memory. You probably need to use something totally different, like writing it down or capturing it on a smartphone or using some recording device or something. And she said, oh my God, I didn't realize that. She thought that she needed to use her memory. So for her, being out of integrity meant using a system for capturing that couldn't keep up with the demands on her life. So for me, integrity is having all of the elements in place and having a complete set that works for the individual.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of people miss the idea that one can have their system and still have areas that need to improve. And if you are in some way, shape, or form feeling pain in a part of your life, then that means the system itself is potentially lacking integrity and is something that can be worked on. And we'll talk about that later in this episode.
Integrity is do what you said you were going to do when you said you were going to do it. It sounds simple, and it is, as people who is listening today, probably one of the hardest things to do. And when you go into talk about productivity systems and integrity, conscious or not, that is the reason that make people start looking for a better productivity system, or for the first productivity system, is the fact that they are saying they are going to accomplish, they are going to do, or they are going to deliver things that are not happening right now, and they're not happening at the time they're even offering them, or they're not happening at all. And they need to match what is happening in their life with what they are saying it should be happening in their life. Now, as Francis said, with this person trying to remember everything, the problem is not if she was forgetting or not forgetting anything. The problem is she knows out of her integrity or his integrity that he or she wasn't doing what she was saying that she was going to do at the time that she was going to do it. And that is the reason most people look desperate into productivity, is to be able to work with that integrity element and to be able to be more effective on the sense that people is not looking to cross, instead of 10 items out of their list, 25 or 50 or more. People is looking to match what they said they were going to do with what they are actually doing. And that, what they are trying to do in a more simpler way, is try to match or to bring integrity to the table and do what they are actually trying to or saying that they're going to do.
I see integrity as an alignment of a complete system, sort of the alignment and commitment to a complete system. And I think that's really important for people to truly be trusting of their system, right? Because integrity increases trust, both in an interpersonal perspective, right? If you believe someone lives with integrity, you believe they live with some moral code, some sense of ethics, and therefore they have this sort of moral uprightness. In personal productivity, it's really a relationship with yourself and others to getting things done. And I believe it's that alignment and commitment to the systems that you've created that are really important in personal productivity. So how does one integrate personal productivity systems into their life so that there is this wholeness and this relationship that seems to be right, if you want to call it that, versus wrong in your life?
My opinion is that most people don't go past complaining. So they don't deal with themselves from the point of view that their integrity is important enough to stop complaining. So they see it, they see the problem. They see that, for example, that they promised to be there at 6 and they didn't make it there at 6. And they give an excuse. And that for them is sufficient to cause the problem to go away. That's most people. I think there's a handful of people, a few, who are willing to say there's something that is causing me to be late, and it's something to do with me. Most people don't make that step and start to reflect and then do other steps, like, for example, doing an evaluation of their behaviors in some kind of objective way to try and see how can I take my system to the next level so that I can have more integrity in all the ways that we talked about. So it doesn't even occur to them as a problem. It's just a circumstance of life. And everyone has circumstances and everyone has stuff happens and you can't do anything about it. And that's where they ended their sort of internal dialogue. I think, once again, the exceptional people deal with themselves at a higher standard, and they say, I'm not going to continue to put up with the fact that I'm always late. I'm going to rigorously try to figure out what the solution might be. And that sends them to, articles on the internet, to buying books, to purchasing apps, to picking up a new device, to whatever the action might be. But when someone has that problem, it takes the exceptional person to some kind of search for solutions. And it's always an internal search. It's not a blame the world kind of fake solution. It has to do with the individual.
I need to agree with a lot of what Francis has said. Sadly, we live on an instant gratification society where we are looking for the simplest and the fastest of the solution. And integrity and productivity, it's not exempt of that. And people tend to spend more time looking for those instant solutions than spending the time working to find the solution. And guilty of charge, by the way. I wish to say that in everything that crosses my realm, I first look for the more complex solution and then I look for the simple one, for the instant one. But the reality is we all try to find sometime or the other the simple solution. But as Francis said, there is only a small percentage of people who, after that initial search fail, then go to the next step and look for the other difficult path. Years ago, I'm going to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of this next year. I weighed around 400 pounds. For the people who's not in the U.S., it's a little bit over 200 kilograms. And I look for all the easy solutions to that. I tried many things. At the moment, I decided that I was going to do something about it. And when everything or all those solutions failed me, then was the moment that I needed to look and sit and make the hard call and the hard decision of bringing integrity to the table. This was a problem I was going to look into, regardless how painful it was, or it was a problem that I was going to continue ignoring. Okay, today I weighed less than 50% of that, and I'm still working on it. But it was a plan that is easy to say, but as I said, well, I'm coming to celebrate my 10th year anniversary with that. And some of these things required you to go into this more complex and long and painful process in order to get it. Productivity, sadly, is one of those. You can kick, you can complain, you can cry, all that you want, but the problem is you can fool most people most of the time. You can fool a lot of people a lot of the time, but you cannot fool everybody all the time, and especially you cannot fool yourself. You can say, oh, I'm acting in integrity and look how great is my system, and most people will never know, but the reality is you will know 24/7 if, in fact, your system is working or is not working, if you are acting on integrity or you are not acting on integrity. That element make it critical for when we talk about personal productivity. Because the problem is if you don't look at personal productivity and the relationship with integrity and how that relationship affects your life, you will not know how the negative effects crawl and really affect or infect everything on a negative way.
You bring up a lot of really interesting points, Augusto and Francis. When you talk about integrity, I tend to lend toward Dr. Stephen Covey, the late Dr. Covey's work when it comes to the discussion of integrity, since he really did focus on it so much in his works, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as well as The 8th Habit. For those who don't know the 7 habits by heart like I do, habit number 4 talks about think win-win. And this idea encompasses 3 vital character traits. It encourages needs. It's vital. It needs integrity, maturity, and abundance mentality. And in terms of integrity, I'll just quote Dr. Covey in how he defines integrity here. He says, "Honesty is telling the truth. In other words, conforming our words to reality. Integrity is conforming reality to our words. In other words, keeping promises and fulfilling expectations. This requires an integrated character, a oneness, primarily with self, but also with life." So I think Dr. Covey covers something really important there that combines what you both are talking about here and is really important to personal productivity systems. I really do believe that in order for you to be highly productive, for you to really overcome many of life's obstacles, whether they be health-related or interpersonal, which I think is probably close related to your health, and all of the other things, technological, technical, and otherwise. I think it's really important for you to be able to identify problems, have that self-awareness that you talked about, Francis, and then really start to think about how the system is serving you as opposed to you serving the system. So very dissimilar to leadership, or at least some leadership styles today. In management, we talk about servant leadership, this idea that you're supposed to be supporting your staff and the people who report to you and your community in order to be able to truly lead it. I think it's very different for personal productivity. I think it's because your system should be continually supporting you. You need to maintain the system, and I think that's a part of integrity, but you really do need to command your system. And that means identifying where there are potential shortfalls in the system and then shoring those up and doing that difficult work of saying, okay, well, I don't have these skills. Do I need to develop these skills? And many times people are unwilling to take the time to look at what's wrong and think of it from a solutions perspective, from what's an alternative to this that's positive and constructive, as opposed to I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm negative adjective. You just fill in the blank of the negative adjectives and nouns that we call ourselves. And I think that negative self-speak actually starts to impede on one's integrity. It starts to ruin it. So one, you need to lean into the positive side of your productive skills, and then you need to actually do those things, right? So it's sort of two parts there, right? You have to, this is not delusional, by the way. I frequently talk to people who, well, I don't feel positive or I don't feel productive about this or that. Well, that's okay. It's understandable. And even to the effect that some people say, well, it's not realistic. Well, the reality is that the world has enough negativity in it. You don't need to add to it. So my suggestion to everyone is just to lean into the productive side. As some therapists would tell you, just lean into the emotion. But I would lean into the positive side of things versus the negative. And I think that starts to open up the opportunity for solutions, and then your ability to then say, I'm going to go do those things. Now, I wanted to move us along in the conversation in terms of how we can raise the bar on integrity in our own productivity systems, and have sort of a thoughtful discussion about how we all are doing in our productivity systems and ways in which we can potentially improve that integrity, that wholeness. My current area of productivity that I'm trying to clean up right now is that I frequently talk about this concept of integration across digital tools. And today I use, as we've talked about before, many different platforms on a daily basis. And across my entire system, I believe in having a uniform set of categories, buckets for things I call life categories. And I really think that level of integrity in your system does a whole bunch of really positive things. So let's just take a very, very basic example of home, health, and work, right? Just three very basic categories. If you had a system whereby you had 3 calendars, home, work, health, and you had 3 Dropbox folders that were home, health, work, and if you had 3 Evernote notebooks called home, health, work, and then you had your email, and your email had 3 folders, home, health, work, you see the point that all of a sudden, if you are looking for something, you now know there are only 3 buckets in which you need to really look for things in those very broad categories. And it also allows you to be able to file faster. That is, when something comes in, if you need to deal with it later, you can anchor that in your next action system or your task list or whatever you might call it, and then immediately put it into home, work, or health, and you don't worry about losing it. There's a sense of trust that you now have to the integrity of your system by being able to do so. And I tell you all of that to say that I am in a massive rework of how I'm doing my own system in that way, that is renaming things and recreating things so that there is a little stronger integrity of my action systems related to my reference systems. I use Evernote as a reference system primarily, and so I really need to make sure that Evernote matches my task management system, my task manager, and I felt like that really wasn't as well in tune. And so that's where I'm working on it right now today, and I hope that by doing so, I'll be able to get my hands on things faster, and I'll also be able to get more things done through the efficiencies that I'll be creating in making sure that my life categories across the system are integrated well.
One thing I've been struggling with recently, it had a good outcome because it helped me to identify that there was an area that I could articulate for my customers or my readers that would make sense. And what it is I noticed that in my schedule, there was often times when I would, as someone who more or less schedules everything, there are times when I would depart from my schedule and not account for it for a whole day or a couple of days. I'd just be way off my calendar, way operating outside of my plan without even referencing it. Now, I have the tools to be able to recover from it in the form of SchedPal, which is an auto scheduler, but I wouldn't have the discipline to go back into SchedPal and run it again to reschedule my calendar whenever I discovered I was off calendar, which is I was away from my plan. So I tried setting up a game to measure the times, different times in the day when I would be on calendar versus off. It would actually prompt me to report whether I was on or off at that particular time. It was a random notification. That helped, but as soon as the game finished, I went back into my old behaviors, and that's where I am right now. So I don't have a solution. It's a sort of an invented problem because I have never seen anyone mention this particular issue in their daily setup, but it's one that I want to fix. But what came out of it is noticing that there's a superpower that people need to develop, a couple of them. One is to detect when their system is about to break. So this is beyond the just noticing that you're having a major problem, that you're always late, for example. But it's noticing that there are some subtle signs that your time management system is about to go bust. And notice what those subtle signs happen to be. So that's the first part. The second part is taking those weak signals and then converting them into in-depth diagnosis, kind of like a Dr. House would do, from the TV show. And then the third part is if you're able to do a good diagnosis, figure out what to implement and then implement it effectively. So I recently called them superpowers in a post I just did because they're so much a part of everyone's life, but I've never heard them quite said that way, that we need to develop these kind of rare skills so that we stay far out of trouble as opposed to figure out how to dig ourselves out of trouble. It's kind of like problem prevention in a way. But that came from the problem I'm having, the challenge I'm having right now of staying on schedule.
And that goes back to what I was saying to integrity, and if I tied it up with what Ray said, honestly, it's been able to admit that you go in a certain way out of integrity when you stop following your calendar. And integrity is knowing that you are not doing that and figure it out that, okay, I need to go back to do what I was doing. But that's one. Second is it's important to mention that one of the difficult issues with integrity, and I call that the bar. So everybody has a bar, and that's set to, above this line and below this line. You are fine when you're above the line. You're not good when you are below the line. So if you think on what you just said, your line is live on the calendar to a certain extent. When you are above that line, then you're fine. You are living into what you are supposed to do. You are doing the things you're supposed to do. Same here. The problem is sometimes we don't notice that we start lowering that bar instead of raising that bar. Problem is if you start lowering the bar, conscious or not, and most of the time it's not, you start also lowering the bar on other areas. When you say, you know what, I have decided that this work life is too stressful for me and I am not going to work hard anymore. And I'm going to, instead of try to, reach and grow, I'm going to be whatever it is. It's automatically lowering the bar. You are saying, I'm not going to push, I'm not trying to improve. And what you may notice or not notice immediately is as you start letting the bar going down, you may think it's only happening on your calendar, but it will start happening and influence many other different bars that you have on your life. And everything will start coming down and down and down. And there is an author that it says, whatever is not growing is dying. And the fact with this proverbial bar is exactly the same thing. You can go, I wish to tell you after I don't know how many years reading and writing and teaching productivity that I finally reached the proverbial place, and then my bar is set and it will not need to be moved anymore. But what I have learned over the years in personal productivity is that the more you raise the bar, the more you need to raise the bar. And it's difficult. Every time you need to raise that bar, as Ray explained, and you need to revamp your system and you need to rework your system, it is difficult and it is a struggle. And it doesn't matter how effective, efficient, and how much integrity your current system has. There is a moment when that will not be enough anymore, where now you want to move to the next place, and in order to move to the next place, that assumption of integrity and that proverbial bar need to be raised again. And if you choose not to, and that's always a choice, what's going to happen is that bar is going to start coming down until you hit rock bottom. And rock bottom can be the last time you set, or the private level you set the bar, or maybe 3 or 4 levels below that. I don't know. It will depend from people to people. But what I can assure you is if you start letting the bar going down, the bar is not going down on one area. It's not like, oh, well, I don't follow the calendar anymore. I walk free will. Well, I promise you that your life is going to start being influenced by those things. It may be the calendar, and soon enough, other areas of your life are also going to be suffering from that lack of integrity, because the fact is that you are a one person, a one self, and or you play with integrity, or you do not play with integrity. You may have different levels of integrity on different areas of your life, but you play with integrity, or you do not play with integrity.
Just in summary, I think it's really important for people to not lose heart when you realize that your system may not be as integral and that you may not be living with the standard of integrity that you might feel you should. Because shoulds, woulds, coulds, wants, those are all not reality, okay? And the circumstances, what are you right now? And you either change it or you don't, okay? And thinking negatively about the situation is not necessarily going to bring you a lot of positive movement. It's not going to motivate you typically. And I tend to think that fear-based motivations tend not to allow for lasting growth. Sort of I'm a positive behaviorist in that sense. So punishment, I don't believe, are the ways forward to a greater integrity with your personal productivity system. So I highly encourage people to think positively about it, even when you first start out with a negative sense of the system. That is, you're having negative consequences, you're not getting things done, and you need to or want to. Well, that's great. Now you can at least recognize that. But now look at it from, as I said before, a positive and constructive perspective. Lean into the positive and constructive, and I think that you can then start to clean up the system and look for gaps. Typically, where I see lack of integrity with clients is them missing parts of their world that need a system. So that they look at, say, they have a bunch of magazines that they want to read, digital or paper. And so they either see the pile, or they have the list of magazines that they want to read, or list of books, or list of articles, or they have read it later applications like Pocket or Instapaper, or like for me, I have that in Evernote, and it's just a big pile of stuff, right? Things that they need to or want to do, and it hasn't been done, and that gives them that sense of overwhelm, and then feeling a lack of integrity to their system. They're not maintaining their system in a way in which they said they would. Well, that's fine. Just don't harp on the fact that you're not doing it. Really focus that energy more productively and constructively on doing something about it. Which is, are you going to declare bankruptcy on the pile that exists already, or are you going to process? Are you going to take today's, yesterday's, and the oldest day's materials and read those, and then tomorrow do today's, anything you didn't catch yesterday, and the oldest day's material. And you'll be surprised over time how quickly you can regain integrity through maintenance than you can through all the negative thinking in the world. Okay? So I really hope that people can create greater integrity in their personal productivity systems through positive, constructive thinking.
It's better to improve your integrity when you are in a positive space, because you must improve it. It's only a question of, are you going to do it when you're miserable, or are you going to do it when you're empowered? You must do it. It's much easier to do if you're in the latter. If you're present and you're confident, or you have some momentum behind you, inevitably that's not what we do, but that is the best time to start to deal with yourself and deal with all of your different areas of your life. At one point, I remember completing a 100-point checklist for integrity. And it was very, very, very useful. It was done at a really good time in my life also. So I'd underline what you just said and what Augusto said.
I think we are in a weird agreement that, and I love that, you can do it when you are empowered, or you can wait until you are defeated. But you are going to do it anyways, or most people will need to do it anyways. Going back to the beginning of our cast, not only you are going to need to do it, it's a fact. You can choose not to do it, and that is a fact, and I have sadly seen it. Most of the people who will choose not to do it are not listening to this. If you are probably listening to this, it's because you think, or you are doing something about it, or you need to do something about it, or you have done it already in the past. And the second and last thing I want to say is that it's important, and Ray mentioned it, is whatever time it took you to get to the place you are, it's going to take you double to get to the place you want to go. That is really, really important to remember, because people lost those tracks, as Francis put as an example. Well, I go a couple of days and I lost track of my calendar. Hey, I have done that, okay? Or I get a fire, a week that I just fighting fire to fire to fire to fire to fire, and come Thursday and I have not even opened my system. Hey, those happen. But remember that when you get to that point, in order to get back to where you want, is going to take you double of the time. In other words, it took us 4 days to get to that level of couch. It's not going to take you 4 hours to get out of there. It's probably going to take you a good 8, because you will not be able to stop everything in order to get out of the hole. One of the most foolish things we tend to think on personal productivity is, tomorrow I will have more time. No, tomorrow you will have less time. That's a fact, because you are going to need to do everything that you are agreeing today, but plus everything that is just showing up. So remember, when you get to that point, in order to get out, it's going to take you double of the time you get there. And the reason I said that and enforce that is because it's important to remember, so you are kind with yourself, because it will not do any good if you go 4 days without checking everything out of track and you get to that place. Spend the next 8 or 9 telling yourself and reminding yourself how behind you are. Hey, you are behind. That's a fact. Move on. Now let's plan to get out.
That's a perfect note for us to end this episode of Productivitycast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. Thank you guys for joining me here on this show.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of Productivitycast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.